Welcome to the Pardes channel. Today we explain Genesis chapter 34 in a clear and simple way, step by step. This chapter right here, it contains one of the absolutely most intense, complex, and action-packed historical narratives in the entire biblical text. It is a story just filled with deep emotion, political maneuvering, and devastating consequences. To give you a very brief context before we really dive in, Jacob and his family have recently arrived safely in the land of Canaan after a long journey, and they've pitched their tents near the city of Shechem. We are going to look closely at the literal events that follow, the pashhat, exactly as they unfold verse by verse, understanding the who, the what, the where, and the why, without skipping a single detail. Here is how we're going to break this down today. First, context and the incident. 2, the negotiation. 3, the deception. 4, the attack. 5, the aftermath. And finally, 6, key lessons. All right, let's jump right into section 1, context and the incident.
So verse 1 opens up by introducing us to Dinah, and the text makes a point to note specifically that she is the daughter Leah had borne to Jacob. Now Dinah goes out, she decides to visit the local women of the land, venturing just outside her family's encampment. Then, in verse 2, she's seen by a man named Shechem. You know, in Hebrew, names often carry a lot of descriptive weight, right? Shechem literally translates to shoulder or burden, and he happens to be the son of Hamor, whose name, interestingly enough, translates to donkey. Hamor is the Hivite ruler of this whole area, which makes his son, Shechem, a prince of the city. Then the text gets incredibly direct. When Shechem sees her, he takes her, he lies with her, and he defiles her. This single violent violation of a young woman who had just gone out to observe the land, this is the absolute catalyst for the entire chain of events we're about to see unfold.
But then, what happens next is this immediate, just incredibly jarring psychological shift. In verse 3, despite his aggressive, violent act in taking her, the text actually tells us that Shechem's soul was drawn to Dinah. The specific Hebrew word used here implies clinging, or being firmly, deeply attached. It says he loves the girl, and the literal translation tells us he spoke to the heart of the young woman, he spoke tenderly to her, and then he immediately goes straight to his father, Hamor, demanding in verse 4, "Get me this girl as my wife." He doesn't try to hide what he did, he doesn't cast her aside. Instead, he becomes utterly obsessed, absolutely desperate to formalize and legitimize this relationship through marriage. Now, word inevitably reaches the family camp in verse 5. Jacob hears that his daughter has been defiled, but because his sons were out in the fields tending the livestock, he holds his peace. He just remains quiet. It's a highly pragmatic, deeply cautious response from a patriarch who is living as a minority in a totally foreign land. He knows he needs his full family present before taking action. But in verse 7, when Jacob's sons finally come in from the fields and hear this news, their reaction is explosive. The text says they were grieved and filled with fury. They declare that Shechem had done a disgraceful thing in Israel. And they use a really strong Hebrew word here, navalah. It denotes a severe moral outrage, something that simply should not be done. Their sister's honor has been violently compromised, and their rage is absolute. Which brings us to section 2, the negotiation. So in verses 8 through 10, Hamor approaches Jacob and his sons. And notice he doesn't offer an apology. Instead, he brings this massive, grand political and economic proposal. He asks them to give Dinah to his son Shechem, but then he broadens the offer significantly. He basically invites Jacob's family to fully intermarry with the Hivites, to settle permanently in the land, trade freely, and acquire property. It's a total assimilation offer. Then, in verses 11 and 12, Shechem steps in, and his appeal is just pure emotional desperation. He begs to find favor in their eyes, saying, "Make the price for the bride and the gift I am to bring as great as you like. I'll pay whatever you ask me." He is essentially handing them a blank check, willing to empty his own treasury just to have Dinah. Moving on to section 3, the deception. In verses 13 through 17, the brothers respond to this huge proposal. But the text explicitly tells us something crucial here. It notes they speak deceitfully, with mirma, specifically because their sister Dinah had been defiled. They absolutely do not accept this peace offering at face value. Instead, they set a really strict religious condition. They claim that giving their sister to an uncircumcised man would be a profound disgrace to their family. So, they demand that every single male in Shechem City must undergo circumcision to become like us. They say, if the city agrees, they'll intermarry and become one people. But if they refuse, the brothers state they will simply take Dinah and leave. They are purposefully weaponizing their own sacred covenant to create a devastating physical vulnerability.
And this brilliantly illustrates the totally differing motives we see mapped out in verses 18 to 24. The proposal seems incredibly favorable to Hamor and Shechem. Shechem's so delighted with Dinah that he loses no time in agreeing. But look closely at how Hamor and Shechem pitch this deal to the men at the gate of their city, which, remember, is the center of ancient civic and commercial life. To Jacob, Hamor had promised shared land and peace, but to his own citizens, he appeals directly to their baseline greed. He argues, these men are peaceful with us, but won't their livestock, their property, and all their other animals become ours? Hamor manipulates his own men, using the prospect of quietly absorbing Jacob's immense wealth to convince the entire male population to undergo this incredibly painful procedure. And that sets the stage for Section 4, the attack.
Let's map out the meticulous execution of this hidden plan, starting right in verse 25. Every male who goes out of the city gate agrees with Hamor, and they are all circumcised. But the brothers, they do not strike immediately. They wait. They wait exactly until the third day. Biologically speaking, this is the time when the physical pain, the inflammation, and the fever from the procedure are at their absolute peak. It renders the men of the city completely bedridden and incapacitated. So, while the city is unsuspecting and utterly defenseless, two of Dinah's full brothers, from Leah, Simeon and Levi, take up their swords and launch a ruthless surprise assault. The text in verses 25 and 26 is completely unsparing in its detail. Simeon and Levi strike down every single male in the city. They go specifically straight to the leaders, executing Hamor and his son Shechem with the edge of the sword. And finally, they enter Shechem's house, physically extract their sister Dinah, and they leave. It is a highly targeted, absolutely merciless rescue mission and mass execution carried out methodically by these two brothers to avenge the defilement of their sister. But the violence doesn't stop with just Simeon and Levi. Verses 27 to 29 reveal that the other sons of Jacob arrive on the scene. Finding the dead bodies of the townsmen, they proceed to systematically loot the defiled city. They seize all the flocks, the herds, the donkeys, literally everything out in the fields. They carry off all the wealth from the houses, and they even take all the women and children captive as plunder. What began as an orchestrated, targeted revenge plot by two brothers rapidly escalates into the total devastation and plundering of an entire city by the rest of the family. Now, we have to look at the fallout in Section 5, the aftermath. In verse 30, Jacob's reaction to this massacre is incredibly striking. He confronts Simeon and Levi, telling them, "You have brought trouble on me by making me a stench to the Canaanites and Perizzites." Notice Jacob's total focus here. It is purely existential. He says, "We are few in number, and if they join forces against me and attack me, I and my household will be destroyed." He doesn't directly address the morality of the deception. He doesn't talk about the plunder. He addresses the sheer, terrifying physical danger they are now in. But Simeon and Levi's defense is entirely different. They do not care about the surrounding Canaanite armies. They are solely focused on the moral outrage, defending their family's honor at absolutely any cost. Which leads us to Section 6, Key Lessons. From this intense textual history, we can actually draw several profound practical lessons for our everyday lives. First, we see the severe consequences of unchecked anger. What started as a desire for personal justice rapidly escalated into the disproportionate massacre and looting of an entire city. Second, we witness the destructive ripple effects of deception, specifically how dangerous it is to twist something sacred or religious into a weapon of war. Third, the text exposes the danger of hidden financial motives, right? As we saw with Hamor's fatal greed that literally doomed his people. And finally, we're left to ponder the incredibly complex, often agonizing balance between demanding absolute justice for a wrong committed and maintaining the practical peace and survival of a community. The brothers answer Jacob's fears for their survival with one final piercing question in verse 31. They ask, "Should he have treated our sister like a prostitute?" And the text ends exactly on this unresolved tension. It offers absolutely no neat conclusion. To briefly recap what we just explored, Dinah was violated, a deceptive peace and assimilation offer was made, the brothers used a sacred rite as a violent trap, and a city was entirely destroyed, leaving a family bitterly divided over the true meaning of justice and survival. Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.